The phenomenon of perceived weakness transforming into strategic advantage represents one of the most fascinating aspects of human behavioral psychology, particularly in high-stakes confrontational scenarios. This documentation examines the psychological and tactical implications of underestimation as a weapon, focusing on instances where individuals dismissed as passive or ineffectual demonstrate decisive leadership capabilities that fundamentally alter the trajectory of critical situations. The central thesis explored herein posits that the individual who systematically destroys their weaker self through conscious psychological reconstruction becomes essentially invulnerable to external destruction by adversaries. This transformation, while often invisible to observers until the moment of revelation, represents a complete restructuring of personal identity and operational capability that renders traditional methods of intimidation and control ineffective. Part 1. The Psychology of Perceived Weakness and Strategic Misdirection. The research facility's corridors echoed with the measured footsteps of security personnel conducting their routine evening patrol. Dr. Elena Vasquez moved through these same corridors with a different rhythm entirely. Quiet, deliberate, almost apologetic in its careful avoidance of attention. For 3 years, her colleagues had observed her consistent pattern of behavior: head slightly lowered during meetings, voice barely audible during presentations, and a tendency to physically position herself at the periphery of any gathering. The scientific community at the Helix Research Institute had long since categorized her as brilliant but painfully shy, a researcher whose contributions, while technically sound, lacked the assertive presence necessary for leadership roles. This perception had been carefully cultivated through months of deliberate behavioral conditioning. Elena understood that in environments where power dynamics played crucial roles, the individual who appeared least threatening often possessed the greatest operational freedom. Every hesitant gesture, every quietly delivered observation, every instance of stepping back to allow others to speak first, represented calculated elements of a comprehensive misdirection strategy. The hostile forces that had infiltrated the facility's security protocols over the past 6 months operated under the same fundamental assumption that had guided her colleagues' assessments. Intelligence reports consistently described Dr. Vasquez as a non-factor in potential resistance scenarios, a classification that granted her unprecedented access to information and positioning during the critical phases of what would become known as the Helix incident. The psychological principle underlying this phenomenon extends far beyond simple camouflage or deception. True strategic misdirection requires the complete internalization of the projected persona to the point where the performance becomes indistinguishable from authentic behavior, even under intense scrutiny. Elena had spent 18 months systematically reconstructing her public identity, while simultaneously strengthening her actual capabilities through rigorous mental and tactical preparation. Her apparent shyness masked an analytical mind that had memorized every security protocol, emergency procedure, and personnel schedule within the facility. Her tendency to remain silent during strategic discussions allowed her to observe and catalog the decision-making patterns, psychological weaknesses, and operational blind spots of both allies and potential threats. Most critically, her reputation for non-confrontational behavior meant that her movements throughout the facility generated minimal attention or suspicion. The transformation process she had undergone represented a fundamental principle of human psychological development: the deliberate destruction of limiting self-concepts through systematic exposure to progressively more challenging scenarios. Each instance where she had forced herself to appear weak while internally maintaining strength had incrementally destroyed the parts of her psyche that actually were weak. The fear of confrontation, the need for external validation, the instinctive desire to avoid responsibility, these aspects of her former self had been systematically identified, challenged, and eliminated through a process of controlled psychological reconstruction. When the facility's main power systems failed at 21:47 hours on a Tuesday evening, most personnel assumed it represented a routine maintenance issue. Backup generators engaged automatically, emergency lighting activated throughout the complex, and standard protocols dictated that all non-essential personnel should remain in designated safe areas until power restoration was complete. Elena remained at her workstation in the biochemistry lab, ostensibly continuing her research on protein synthesis pathways, maintaining the same focused but unobtrusive presence that had characterized her work for years. The subtle changes in her behavior during this period would only become apparent upon later analysis of security footage. Her posture straightened incrementally, her movements became more purposeful, and her eyes began tracking details of her environment with systematic precision. The transformation was occurring, but it remained invisible to casual observation, because it represented the emergence of capabilities that had been present all along, hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed misdirection. The infiltration team that had spent months planning their operation had factored every significant variable into their strategic calculations. They had identified key personnel who might organize resistance, mapped out communication networks that could facilitate coordination among defenders, and developed specific countermeasures for each individual they classified as a potential threat. Dr. Elena Vasquez did not appear on any of these lists. Her profile indicated a researcher whose responses to crisis situations would likely involve seeking shelter and waiting for instructions from authority figures. This assessment represented a fundamental failure in threat evaluation methodology. The attackers had correctly identified individuals who appeared strong but had overlooked the possibility that apparent weakness might mask exceptional capability. Their intelligence gathering had focused on observable behaviors and documented achievements while failing to recognize that some individuals deliberately cultivate misleading public personas as a form of strategic preparation. The moment when Elena's true nature began to emerge occurred approximately 37 minutes after the initial power failure. The facility's communication systems had been systematically compromised through what appeared to be coordinated cyber attacks, isolating different sections of the complex and preventing effective coordination among security personnel. Most researchers and administrative staff had gathered in designated emergency areas, following established protocols while waiting for normal operations to resume. Elena had ostensibly joined one of these groups, positioning herself near the rear of the assembly, as would be expected given her established behavioral patterns. However, her actual attention was focused on analyzing the pattern of system failures and identifying the tactical objectives underlying the seemingly random disruptions. The progression of compromised systems indicated a sophisticated understanding of the facility's infrastructure and suggested that the attackers possessed detailed intelligence about critical vulnerabilities. Her first decisive action came when she quietly approached Dr. Marcus Chen, the facility's head of security operations, and requested a private consultation. Her manner remained consistent with her established persona, hesitant, apologetic, clearly uncomfortable with drawing attention to herself. However, the information she provided during their brief conversation represented a comprehensive tactical analysis that demonstrated strategic thinking capabilities far beyond anything she had previously displayed. The enemy's infiltration strategy, she explained in her characteristically quiet voice, followed a specific pattern designed to isolate key personnel while maintaining the appearance of random system malfunctions. The timing of each failure had been calculated to prevent effective communication between different sections of the facility, while gradually herding non-combatant personnel into predetermined containment areas. Most significantly, the attackers appeared to be operating under intelligence assessments that significantly underestimated the defensive capabilities of several key individuals. Dr. Chen's response to this analysis marked the first moment when Elena's carefully maintained facade began to shift. His immediate recognition of the accuracy and sophistication of her assessment, combined with his request that she provide additional tactical guidance, created a situation where continued performance of weakness would compromise the safety of everyone in the facility. The moment had arrived when the destruction of her weak self would need to become visible to others. The psychological transformation that occurred in the following minutes represented the culmination of years of internal preparation. Elena's voice gained strength and clarity, her posture straightened, and her movements became characterized by decisive precision rather than hesitant uncertainty. The change was so dramatic that several colleagues who witnessed it later described feeling as though they were observing a completely different person, someone who had been hidden beneath the surface of the researcher they thought they knew. Her first strategic directive involved repositioning key personnel to locations that would provide maximum tactical advantage while appearing to comply with standard emergency protocols. Her knowledge of the facility's layout, combined with her analysis of the attackers' operational patterns, allowed her to identify several positions where small groups of defenders could effectively monitor and potentially intercept infiltration attempts while remaining invisible to enemy surveillance. The brilliance of her approach lay in its utilization of the same misdirection principles that had governed her personal transformation. By making defensive preparations appear to be standard emergency responses, she prevented the attackers from recognizing that their operation had been detected and analyzed. The personnel movements she orchestrated looked like routine evacuations, but actually created a network of concealed observation posts that would provide early warning of enemy advancement while maintaining escape routes for non-combatant personnel. Part 2. The strategic emergence and tactical revolution, the transformation of Dr. Elena Vasquez from perceived non-combatant to tactical coordinator, represented more than individual character development. It demonstrated the fundamental principle that true strength emerges most effectively from positions of assumed weakness. Her ability to orchestrate defensive measures while maintaining the appearance of compliance with standard procedures illustrated the strategic advantage inherent in being systematically underestimated by adversaries. As the facility's situation continued to deteriorate, with communication systems remaining compromised and signs of external infiltration becoming increasingly apparent, Elena's role evolved from advisor to operational commander. This transition occurred not through formal appointment or recognition of authority, but through the natural gravitation of personnel toward effective leadership during crisis situations. Her recommendations consistently proved accurate. Her strategic assessments demonstrated comprehensive understanding of both defensive requirements and enemy capabilities, and her calm demeanor provided stability for individuals who were experiencing their first exposure to genuine threat scenarios. The attacking force had designed their operation around detailed intelligence regarding the facility's standard emergency responses and the expected behavioral patterns of key personnel. Their timing had been calculated to exploit a period when several senior security officers were attending an off-site conference, leaving the facility with reduced defensive capability and leadership structure. The psychological profiles they had developed for remaining personnel indicated that effective resistance organization would be unlikely, particularly given the careful selection of a time frame when the most assertive personalities would be absent from the complex. Elena's emergence as a coordinating figure represented a complete failure of their intelligence assessment methodology. Their profiles had accurately identified individuals who appeared strong and would likely attempt to organize resistance efforts, but they had failed to recognize that systematic underestimation could itself be utilized as a tactical advantage by individuals who possessed the psychological sophistication to deliberately cultivate misleading public personas. Her strategic approach during the initial phases of the crisis demonstrated several key principles of effective crisis leadership. First, she maintained operational security by ensuring that defensive preparations appeared to be routine emergency responses rather than organized resistance activities. This prevented the attackers from recognizing that their infiltration had been detected and their tactics analyzed, preserving the element of surprise for defensive countermeasures. Second, she utilized the facility's communication limitations as an advantage rather than simply viewing them as obstacles. By establishing a network of concealed observation posts that could maintain visual contact with one another, she created an information-gathering system that was immune to the electronic surveillance and communication disruption that formed core elements of the enemy's operational strategy. Personnel positioned at these locations could relay information through hand signals and predetermined visual codes, maintaining tactical coordination without relying on compromised electronic systems. Third, she recognized that the psychological state of non-combatant personnel represented both a vulnerability and a potential asset. Fear and uncertainty could lead to panic responses that would compromise defensive effectiveness. But properly channeled, the same emotional energy could enhance alertness and compliance with tactical directives. Her approach involved providing personnel with specific, manageable tasks that contributed to overall defensive effectiveness while maintaining their sense of agency and purpose. The first major test of her tactical coordination occurred when the facility's main security station reported visual contact with unidentified personnel attempting to access the building through service entrances that should have been secured. Standard protocols would have involved immediate lockdown procedures and direct confrontation with the intruders, but Elena recognized that such responses would alert the attackers to the presence of organized resistance, while potentially exposing security personnel to superior numbers and firepower. Instead, she coordinated a response that allowed the intruders to believe their infiltration was proceeding undetected, while actually channeling their movement through routes that had been prepared with defensive advantages. Service corridors that appeared to provide concealed access to critical areas had been subtly modified to become observation zones where defenders could monitor enemy movement and numbers without being detected. Emergency lighting that seemed to have failed randomly had actually been selectively disabled to create areas of tactical shadow where defensive personnel could reposition without being observed. The psychological pressure of coordinating such activities while maintaining her facade of hesitant uncertainty represented an extreme test of the internal reconstruction she had undergone. Every directive had to be delivered in a manner consistent with her established personality, while actually representing sophisticated tactical thinking that few individuals in the facility could have matched. The cognitive dissonance required to simultaneously project weakness while executing complex strategic coordination would have been psychologically devastating to anyone who had not systematically destroyed their attachment to limiting self-concepts. Her ability to maintain this performance under increasing stress demonstrated the completeness of her internal transformation. The weak aspects of her personality that might have crumbled under such pressure had been systematically identified and eliminated through years of deliberate psychological conditioning. What remained was a core of capability and determination that could function effectively regardless of external circumstances or the opinions of others. As the situation escalated and the attackers began advancing deeper into the facility, Elena faced the critical decision of whether to maintain her misdirection strategy or openly assume command authority. The tactical advantages of continued concealment had to be weighed against the increasing complexity of coordination requirements and the growing need for visible leadership to maintain morale among defensive personnel. Her resolution of this dilemma illustrated another key principle of effective crisis management: the ability to adapt tactical approaches to changing circumstances without abandoning core strategic objectives. Rather than completely abandoning her established persona, she began selectively revealing her capabilities to specific individuals who had demonstrated competence and reliability. This gradual disclosure allowed her to maintain operational security while building a network of subordinate coordinators who could implement her tactical directives with greater efficiency. The first individual to receive full disclosure of her capabilities and strategic assessment was Dr. James Morrison, a materials science researcher who had demonstrated exceptional calm under pressure and had consistently followed her subtle directives without requiring detailed explanation. His response to learning that the quiet, seemingly timid colleague he had known for 3 years was actually an individual capable of sophisticated tactical thinking and crisis coordination illustrated the profound psychological impact of witnessing the destruction of assumed personality limitations. Morrison later described the experience as simultaneously inspiring and unsettling. The revelation that someone he had consistently underestimated possessed capabilities far beyond his own challenged fundamental assumptions about personality assessment and individual potential. More significantly, it demonstrated that his own concepts of personal limitation might be equally illusory, suggesting that perceived weaknesses could be systematically addressed and eliminated through conscious effort and strategic preparation. Elena's coordination of Dr. Morrison's integration into tactical planning represented a masterclass in leadership psychology. Rather than simply providing him with instructions to follow, she began with a comprehensive briefing that allowed him to understand the strategic situation and the reasoning behind specific tactical decisions. This approach transformed him from a passive recipient of orders into an active participant in strategic thinking, multiplying her effective leadership capacity while building the kind of decentralized command structure that could continue functioning even if primary leadership was compromised. The attacking force's first major tactical error became apparent when they attempted to breach the facility's central laboratory complex. Their intelligence had indicated that this area would be lightly defended, and that most personnel would have evacuated to designated emergency areas. Instead, they encountered a carefully prepared defensive zone where concealed personnel could observe their movements and coordinate responses without being detected. The defensive strategy Elena had implemented did not rely on direct confrontation or superior firepower. Instead, it utilized the attacker's own assumptions and tactical preferences against them. Routes that appeared to provide convenient access to critical targets had been subtly modified to become observation galleries where defenders could gather intelligence about enemy numbers, equipment, and tactical procedures. Areas that seemed to be undefended actually contained concealed personnel who could monitor enemy activities and coordinate appropriate responses. Most significantly, the defensive approach was designed to make the attackers believe they were succeeding, while actually limiting their access to genuinely critical systems and information. Decoy targets had been prepared that would satisfy their apparent objectives while protecting actual vital resources. This strategy required exceptional psychological discipline from defensive personnel, who had to resist the natural impulse to actively confront intruders, and instead maintain concealed positions that felt passive but were actually strategically crucial. The success of this approach depended entirely on the quality of coordination and the ability of individual defenders to maintain tactical discipline under extreme psychological pressure. Elena's leadership during this phase demonstrated another key aspect of effective crisis management: The ability to inspire confidence and compliance even when requesting actions that contradicted natural instincts and conventional tactical wisdom. Her communication with defensive personnel during these critical moments illustrated the complete integration of her transformed personality. Gone were the hesitant speech patterns and apologetic mannerisms that had characterized her public persona. Instead, her directives were delivered with calm authority and clear reasoning that inspired confidence without creating the kind of dramatic personality shift that might have compromised operational security if observed by enemy forces. The most critical test of her tactical coordination occurred when the attacking force attempted to access the facility's main computer systems, which contained both valuable research data and the control protocols for critical infrastructure systems. Standard security procedures would have involved immediate lockdown of all electronic access, but Elena recognized that such measures would alert the attackers to the presence of sophisticated resistance while potentially trapping defensive personnel in disadvantageous positions. Instead, she coordinated a response that allowed the attackers to believe they were successfully penetrating system security, while actually accessing prepared decoy networks that appeared to contain valuable information, but actually served as intelligence-gathering tools. The sophisticated nature of this deception required coordination between multiple technical specialists and security personnel, all operating under her tactical guidance while maintaining the appearance of standard emergency responses. Part 3. The culmination of transformation and strategic victory. The final phase of what became known as the Helix Incident demonstrated the ultimate manifestation of the principle that individuals who systematically destroy their weak selves become essentially invulnerable to external destruction. Elena's tactical coordination had successfully neutralized the attackers' operational advantages while gathering comprehensive intelligence about their capabilities, objectives, and organizational structure. The moment had arrived when her carefully cultivated facade could be abandoned in favor of direct action. The psychological transformation that occurred during this transition represented the complete emergence of capabilities that had been hidden beneath years of strategic misdirection. Elena's voice, when she finally addressed the assembled defensive personnel, carried an authority that seemed impossible to reconcile with the hesitant researcher they had known. Her tactical briefing demonstrated strategic thinking abilities that surpassed those of individuals with extensive military training, while her calm demeanor under extreme pressure provided the kind of inspirational leadership that transformed frightened researchers into effective defensive coordinators. The attacking force's intelligence assessment had failed to account for the possibility that their primary tactical advantage, surprise and the assumption of superior capability, could be completely negated by an individual who had systematically prepared for exactly this type of scenario. Elena's years of internal psychological reconstruction had created a personality structure that was essentially immune to intimidation, uncertainty, and the kind of pressure tactics that typically disrupted defensive coordination during crisis situations. Her first direct action as acknowledged tactical commander involved a complete reversal of the defensive strategy that had been employed during the infiltration phase. Rather than continuing to allow the attackers to believe they were succeeding, she initiated a coordinated response designed to demonstrate that their operation had been completely compromised from its inception. The psychological impact of this revelation on enemy morale and tactical confidence represented a strategic weapon that was far more effective than conventional defensive measures. The method she employed for this demonstration illustrated the sophisticated psychological understanding that underlay her entire approach to crisis management. Rather than simply confronting the attackers directly, she orchestrated a series of coordinated actions that systematically revealed the extent to which their movements had been monitored and their tactical assumptions had been analyzed. Emergency systems that they believed they had disabled were suddenly reactivated. Personnel who should have been contained in emergency areas appeared in positions that provided tactical advantage. Most significantly, their communications were intercepted, and their tactical discussions were broadcast throughout the facility, making it clear that their operational security had been completely compromised. The psychological effect of these revelations on the attacking force was devastating. Military and paramilitary operations depend heavily on the assumption that tactical superiority and strategic surprise provide decisive advantages over defensive forces. The systematic demonstration that these advantages had not only been neutralized but had actually been turned against them created a level of uncertainty and demoralization that made continued tactical effectiveness virtually impossible. Elena's coordination of this psychological warfare campaign demonstrated another key principle of effective leadership under extreme circumstances. the ability to simultaneously address multiple levels of conflict resolution. While managing the immediate tactical situation, she was also working to minimize the potential for casualties among both defensive personnel and the attacking force. Her strategic objective was not simply to defeat the enemy, but to create conditions where surrender would represent their most rational tactical option. The first members of the attacking force to surrender were those who had been monitoring the facility's communication systems and had therefore been exposed to the most comprehensive evidence of their operation's complete compromise. Elena's decision to allow these individuals to maintain communication with their operational commanders while under defensive supervision created a situation where intelligence about the failed infiltration was transmitted directly to enemy leadership by their own personnel. This approach served multiple strategic objectives simultaneously. It provided enemy commanders with accurate intelligence about their tactical situation, reducing the likelihood that they would authorize escalatory measures that might result in casualties. It demonstrated the sophisticated nature of the defensive response, making it clear that continued resistance would likely result in complete operational failure. Most significantly, it established communication channels that could facilitate negotiated resolution of the crisis without requiring extended confrontation. The psychological principles underlying this strategy reflected Elena's deep understanding of human behavioral dynamics under stress. Individuals who find themselves in tactically disadvantageous positions often respond with increased aggression or desperate measures unless provided with face-saving alternatives that allow for dignified withdrawal. By structuring the surrender process as a tactical reassessment rather than a defeat, she made it psychologically easier for enemy personnel to choose cooperation over continued resistance. Her direct interaction with the attacking force's field commander marked the most dramatic revelation of her transformed personality. The individual who approached the negotiation represented everything that Elena's former weak self would have found intimidating: physically imposing, trained in psychological manipulation, and accustomed to using intimidation as a tactical tool. The conversation that followed demonstrated the complete effectiveness of her internal reconstruction process. Where her former self would have been susceptible to intimidation tactics, her transformed personality recognized such attempts as indicators of desperation and tactical weakness. Where her former self would have sought external validation and approval, her reconstructed identity drew strength from internal conviction and strategic understanding. Most significantly, where her former self would have been focused on avoiding confrontation, her transformed personality viewed the negotiation as an opportunity to achieve optimal resolution of the crisis through superior psychological positioning. The field commander's initial attempts to establish psychological dominance through intimidation tactics failed completely because Elena's internal transformation had eliminated the psychological vulnerabilities that such tactics typically exploited. Her responses demonstrated not only immunity to intimidation, but also sophisticated understanding of the psychological principles underlying such approaches. This reversal of expected power dynamics had a profound effect on the commander's confidence and tactical assessment of the situation. Elena's negotiation strategy focused on demonstrating comprehensive understanding of the attacker's tactical situation, while offering alternatives that served their underlying strategic objectives without compromising facility security. Her analysis of their operational goals revealed that the primary objective involved acquiring specific research data rather than causing casualties or permanent damage to the facility. This insight allowed her to propose resolution strategies that satisfied their core requirements while eliminating the tactical advantages they had expected to achieve through intimidation and force. The psychological sophistication of her approach became apparent when she began addressing the personal motivations and concerns of individual enemy personnel. Rather than treating them as a monolithic threat, she recognized that each individual had specific reasons for participating in the operation and distinct psychological pressures that influenced their decision-making processes. By addressing these individual factors, she created opportunities for members of the attacking force to reconsider their commitment to continued resistance. Her ability to simultaneously maintain tactical coordination of defensive personnel while conducting complex psychological negotiations with enemy forces demonstrated the kind of multifaceted leadership capability that emerges only after systematic destruction of limiting self-concepts. The weak aspects of personality that would typically be overwhelmed by such complex demands had been eliminated through years of deliberate internal reconstruction, leaving a core of capability that could function effectively regardless of external pressure or complexity. The final resolution of the Helix incident occurred when Elena proposed a solution that satisfied the attacker's core objectives while transforming the entire situation from confrontational to collaborative. Her analysis had revealed that the research data they were seeking could be legitimately accessed through proper channels, and that their employers' unwillingness to pursue such channels appeared to be based on misconceptions about the facility's policies and the nature of the research being conducted. By facilitating direct communication between the attacking force's ultimate employers and the facility's research directors, she created a situation where the underlying conflict could be resolved through negotiation rather than continued tactical confrontation. This approach required exceptional psychological courage, as it involved making herself personally responsible for the success or failure of a resolution strategy that depended on accurate assessment of complex motivational factors among multiple parties. The success of this approach validated the fundamental principle that had guided her entire personal transformation process: that individuals who systematically destroy their weak selves through conscious psychological reconstruction become capable of achieving objectives that would be impossible for personalities limited by fear, uncertainty, and external validation requirements. Her ability to transform a potentially catastrophic security breach into an opportunity for collaborative problem-solving represented the ultimate manifestation of strength emerging from apparent weakness. The aftermath of the Helix incident revealed the profound impact that Elena's transformation had on everyone who witnessed it. Colleagues who had known her for years described fundamental changes in their understanding of human potential and personal limitation. The revelation that someone they had consistently underestimated possessed capabilities far beyond their own challenged basic assumptions about personality assessment and individual development. More significantly, her example demonstrated that perceived weaknesses could be systematically addressed and eliminated through conscious effort and strategic preparation. The principle that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others was validated through practical application under extreme circumstances. Her internal transformation had created a personality structure that was essentially immune to the kind of external pressures and tactical manipulations that typically compromised individual effectiveness during crisis situations. The strategic implications of her approach extended far beyond the specific circumstances of the security breach. A demonstration that apparent weakness could be utilized as tactical advantage while simultaneously building genuine capability provided a model for personal development that could be applied across a wide range of challenging circumstances. The psychological principles she had employed could be adapted to any situation where individuals found themselves underestimated or dismissed by others. The documentation of Elena's transformation and its strategic applications became required study material for security personnel and crisis management specialists throughout the organization. Her approach demonstrated that effective leadership during extreme circumstances required not only tactical knowledge and strategic thinking ability, but also the kind of complete personal transformation that could only be achieved through systematic destruction of limiting self-concepts. The final assessment of the Helix incident concluded that Elena's strategic approach had achieved optimal resolution of a potentially catastrophic situation with minimal casualties and maximum intelligence gathering. Her ability to transform tactical disadvantage into strategic advantage through superior psychological positioning and tactical coordination represented a masterclass in crisis leadership that continued to influence security protocols and personnel development programs for years afterward. The principle that guided her transformation, that systematic destruction of personal weakness creates essential invulnerability to external destruction, became recognized as a fundamental concept in advanced leadership development. Her practical demonstration that perceived weakness could mask exceptional capability, while simultaneously building that capability through conscious effort, provided a model for personal development that transcended specific tactical or professional applications. The legacy of Elena Vasquez and the Helix incident ultimately validated the profound truth that human potential is limited primarily by internal concepts of limitation rather than external circumstances or the opinions of others. Her systematic destruction of weak self-concepts through deliberate psychological reconstruction had created a personality capable of achieving objectives that seemed impossible to individuals constrained by conventional assumptions about personal capability and tactical possibility. The documentation of her transformation process and its strategic applications provided a comprehensive guide for anyone seeking to develop similar capabilities through conscious internal reconstruction. The principle that emerges most clearly from analysis of her approach is that true strength develops not through avoiding weakness, but through systematically identifying, confronting, and eliminating the internal factors that create vulnerability to external manipulation and control. Her example demonstrated that the individual who undertakes this process of systematic self-reconstruction becomes capable of functioning effectively under circumstances that would overwhelm personalities limited by fear, uncertainty, and dependence on external validation. The transformed individual possesses not only immunity to conventional intimidation tactics, but also the kind of strategic thinking ability and psychological sophistication that can turn apparent disadvantage into decisive advantage through superior understanding of human behavioral dynamics and tactical psychology. The ultimate lesson of the Helix incident and Elena's transformation is that human potential is virtually unlimited for individuals who possess the psychological courage to systematically destroy the internal concepts that limit their capability and effectiveness. Her practical demonstration of these principles under extreme circumstances provided conclusive evidence that perceived weakness, when properly understood and strategically employed, can become the foundation for extraordinary achievement and essential invulnerability to external destruction.